Hong Kong Direct is your weekly racing roundup full of news, views, previews, interviews and special guests. And coming up on the show today, part one of a two-part special interview. We sit down with David Hall, chatting this week about his time in Australia before he made the move to Hong Kong. And of course, coming up at the end of the month, we're into Derby month. It's the BMW Hong Kong Derby. We chat about the field, who could still make the field as well after two legs, the four-year-old classic series. Excellent proposal winning leg one, the mile, and healthy, happy taking out the second leg, the cup. Very warm welcome to the show. I'm Andrew Jeune. Please say I'm joined this week by Sam Agars, racing writer for the South China Morning Post. And Sam, before we get on to the Derby itself, we'll talk about that in part two. It was a big night out for Zach Purton at Happy Valley on Wednesday. Certainly was, Andrew. 5 winners for Zach, and his biggest night in the saddle for quite some time, and definitely something he would have been pretty happy with Joe Moreira sideline with suspension. Yeah, and there's some new names, I suppose, to a certain extent there at Happy Valley. I thought Hurry Gain was very good, and Ever Force went back to back as well. So possible for some nice horses coming through the ranks there at the Valley. Yeah, definitely a pair of horses that Zach will be looking to stay with through the grades. Hurry Gain for Frankie Law certainly was impressive, and he looks like he's got plenty of upside. And the other key point, I suppose, about Wednesday night as well, there was no Joe Moreira, so Zach got to team up with John Size, who he hasn't done too often so far this season, but he certainly made it count. Yeah, he certainly did, winning on Wealthy Delight and Wind and Grass, both very well found in the market, but Zach was able to get the job done. Yeah, unfortunately couldn't quite make it 6 with Sabaquin, who was naturally a very well-backed favourite in the last, but still, 5 winners out of 9 rides. That's a pretty good effort by anyone's standard. Zach on to 70 wins for the campaign as well. All right, first up, we're going to chat to David Hall, who's ticking along the stable very nicely this year with 20 wins already. Ed Sadler caught up with David this week to chat about his time in Australia before he made the switch.
Well, David, thank you very much for your time this morning. Let's go back to the beginning of your training career. Your father trained horses at Morphettville. Were you always destined to get into the racing game?
Yeah, I think so. From the time where I, got that little bit of a bug in the early teens, it sort of took control of your life from there. I think as a young boy, that apparently I was always wanted to be a fireman and a footballer, but once you got old enough to sort of appreciate what was happening in the backyard and probably starting to have 50 cents each way on something, then all of a sudden you get the bug and away you go.
So you started training at Morphettville in 1988. What were those early days for you like as a trainer?
Yeah, it all happened sort of fairly quickly. I left school and worked at Agars then, which is now the Magic Millions, and so I spent 2 years in the pedigree department. I was with a group of really well-credentialed people, as it turned out. At the time, it was Simon Vivian and Neil Bowden and Tony Reardon, and David Coles was my boss, and these are all sort of really well-respected guys in the industry these days. And it was a really good learning curve, and I was still sort of trying to help out Dad in the mornings and go to work. So eventually, I just turned to being foreman for Dad and left Agars and concentrated on running the stable with Dad and learning as much as I could. And then went for a little tour overseas. I went to England for 6 months, came back and was even more infected by the sport and wanted to train myself, and then eventually had 1 or 2 with Dad and just got bigger and bigger from there. So it all happened very fast.
After a number of years in South Australia, in the early 90s, you made the move to Melbourne. Was that the next step in your progression as a trainer?
I had a couple of big supporters. David Weeks and John Manuel were sort of backing the stable, and I didn't last long at Dad's. There was no room. I had to buy the stables next door, and we were sort of having quite a bit of success, and those guys were getting very heavily involved, and they wanted to move their business to Melbourne. And I woke up one day and thought, hell, why aren't I going? So that sort of developed. They were the instigators of it, and without their support, I probably wouldn't even be here today.
Let's talk about some of the highlights from your time in Melbourne. First of all, the 1999 Melbourne Cup Carnival. Leading trainer, 8 winners, 1 each on Derby Day and Stakes Day, but trebles on Cup Day and Oaks Day. That must have been one of the best weeks you've ever had as a trainer.
Yeah, it's a funny, the Spring Carnival is something else. Probably you know, my first experience, I was still training in Adelaide. I took 2 horses over and they both won on Cup week. So, you know, it was something that you can't explain at that point. And then it sort of, it kept raising the bar, and it got to that level of, you mentioned the 99 year when we had the 8 winners. You know, in a way, it was probably a better achievement than winning the Melbourne Cup. I mean, the Melbourne Cup's the Melbourne Cup, and it's a piece of history and everything. But that actual week of the 8 winners, you know, it was a lot of hard work. It was just a really busy environment, and you know, you're under a lot of pressure, and you know, you're striving to do those sort of things, but to actually stand back there and achieve it, I think since I've been here 20 years, not quite 20 years, but you know, since that day, I don't think anyone's trained 8 winners since. So it tells you how difficult it is, and to be champion trainer for the week, you're up in the committee room afterwards with Bart Cummings and Peter Hayes and those sort of guys, and yeah, that was a really big achievement for me.
And the horse that in Australia you'll always be linked to is Makybe Diva. You trained her to win her first Melbourne Cup. What are your first memories of Makybe, David?
She was just, you know, I was part of the whole story when, you know, John Foote bought the mother, and you know, she went through the ring as a foal and nobody wanted her, and when she finally turned up in Australia, you could tell why nobody wanted her. She was just like a big daddy long leg spider, you know. She was all frame and all legs, and she certainly didn't look like she was going to be an instant 2-year-old runner, that's for sure. But with her pedigree, we knew what they went out to buy. You know, they were buying sort of stout bred English pedigrees, and so she was always going to take a lot of time, which she did. We finally got her to the track, and you know, she was by no means the finished product, and you know, she got beat her first start and was very unlucky. From that day onwards, we knew that, you know, she was something special.
So what about Melbourne Cup Day 2003? What are your memories like of winning the race that stops a nation?
Yeah, once again, it was an unbelievable experience. I was sponsored by Tui's, and Tui's was sponsoring the Melbourne Cup, so I was fortunate enough to have the sponsors box which overlooked the mounting yard, so I had all my family in there. I had 3 runners in the race, so it was one of those you know, moments that you'll never forget.
But Makybe Diva shot away. She's out by 2 lengths to She's Archie. Pentastic and Zagalia. Makybe Diva in front. She's Archie tries hard, but Makybe Diva wins the cup. She's Archie second.
And about 6 months later, you then won the Sydney Cup with her before coming here to Hong Kong. Was that a high note to leave Australian racing on?
Yeah, I think my last runner was actually in the Brisbane Cup with Pentastic, and he was, you know, quite unlucky, I think. So that would have been an even higher note. But oh, look, I think the Sydney Cup was a bit of an afterthought. We were a bit disappointed. You know, she got beat in the 1.5 mile race leading into that, and I sent her back to Melbourne, and Vinnie Hall, my cousin, galloped her for me and said, oh, you know, she's as good as she's ever been. He said, oh, if you wanted to send her back for the Cup, I can't give you any reason not to. Just because of her ability at the 2 miles, we thought it was a bit of a shallow race. I think she was obviously way below her best at that time, and she was still quite immature. You know, I sent her to the paddock after the Sydney Cup. She went up to Arrowfield to spell, and she put on 40 or 50 kilos. I mean, you know, she was still tired from the Melbourne Cup from that autumn prep. And she was still very much, you know, 12 months behind everything. You know, she took that long to fully mature, and then when she went down to Lee, she was a bigger and stronger mare. And you know, I said, I told Tony Sandings the best option is to send her to Freedman's, get her away from the city tracks and give her the country environment, and she might get a bit more longevity out of her. And she certainly did, and she just got bigger and stronger. And you know, even before the Caulfield Cup, the second time round for Lee, he was a bit concerned. He rang and said, you know, she hasn't shown me what she's capable of yet. I said, just wait till after the weekend, you'll see.
I'll ask you the question that you would have been asked a million times as well too. It's famous that after that first Cup, you come to Hong Kong, she goes to Lee, as you say. To leave behind a champion, how does that sit with you now?
Yeah, look, I don't think nobody could ever predict she was going to win 3 Melbourne Cups. So, look, it's great to still be part of it. You know, it'll be a good question down the track who was the trainer of Maccabi Diva, it won't be mentioned as me probably, but you know, I'm sitting pretty well where I am. I mean, the decision to come here was, you know, David Hayes said to me, you know, you double your pay and half your workload, and you look at the way things are in Australia these days, you know, it's a much better place to be sitting here in Hong Kong and training than it is down there grafting away and finding it tough to get ahead. So I think it's the right decision, and you know, of course, it hurt to watch, you know, to see her win, and you're not there to be part of it. But you know, she was the one that got me here, and I was pretty happy about that.
So next week, Ed will be chatting to David about his time here in Hong Kong. But Sam, that's probably the obvious place to pick up with them talking about Maccabi Diva and the move here. David seems pretty happy with his decision. I mean, she was a mare of a lifetime, but this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, I suppose.
Absolutely, and look, no doubt he had some bittersweet afternoons once he got to Hong Kong, watching her go on to bigger and better things. But look, I guess that's the attitude you've got to take, isn't it? Be happy that the time that he did have with her, and I guess the opportunities that came from that.
Yeah, you mentioned David Hayes in that chat as well, and it's funny that their careers and their lives, I suppose, have been intersected to a certain extent, because starting off in South Australia, I know you're a South Australian boy as well, is that he'd have been working, you know, under the shadow. I mean, that's, most of Australian racing was under the shadow of Lindsay Park, from the great Colin Hayes, David and Peter as well during that period. Yeah,
and I guess so many very good trainers have laid a foundation in South Australia before doing what David did and moving on to Melbourne and really blossoming from there.
And next week, you won't be here. I don't think you're here next week anyway, Sam, but we'll be talking about Hong Kong, his time here. David's already nearly 500 winners for his time here in the region, and he's had some nice horses along the way as well.
Look, he certainly has. He's been a very consistent trainer in his time here. Absolute Champion's one that comes to mind. 3 Group 1s, probably one of the better horses that he's had in his time here.
All right, so part 2 next week with Ed. Part 2 for us here on Hong Kong Direct. We're looking ahead to the BMW Hong Kong Derby. That comes up next.